The London Luminaries is a group of 15 historic properties working together to explore the history of the West of London. And this is the third of our 10 talks on the theme of love and death. Do check our new website for details of the rest of the series. My name is Judith Hawley and I'm your chair for this evening. I want to thank you for watching and also want to thank Rachel and all the others who work behind the scenes to make these events possible. Our talk tonight has the marvellous title, Mad, Bad and Dangerous to Know, the turbulent love life and tragic death of Lady Caro Lamb. And our speaker, Nadege Forde-Vidal, has been working at Chiswick House and Gardens in a variety of capacities since 2019. She currently leads the research for the Black Chiswick Through History project and also delivers culturally inclusive local history workshops through the wonderful Sankofa London Schools Project. So over to you, Nadege.
Thank you very much, Judith. It's lovely to be back here sharing some more of Chiswick's fascinating stories. So welcome everyone to Mad, Bad and Dangerous to Know, the turbulent love life and tragic death of Lady Caroline Lamb. I suppose I'd quite like to start just by saying how I feel a kind of 40-minute expose of Lady Caroline Lamb does her far from justice. I've learnt so much when I've been researching her life. It feels like quite a lot of the things that we know about her are kind of centred around rumour and gossip. And it's been fascinating to read through her letters, which I urge you all to read for yourselves, as they are all available online, as far as I'm aware, and they're freely accessible now. So you really get much more of a sense of the woman behind all that rumour and get to know her a lot better through the letters that she wrote to her friends and family. Caroline Ponsonby, or Caro as she was later known, was born in 1785. She was the daughter of Harriet Ponsonby, who was near Spencer, and was the niece of Georgiana, the Duchess of Devonshire, who obviously was a resident of Chiswick. You can see the two sisters here on the left together as young girls, and Harriet on the right hand side, several years after she'd given birth to Caro's brothers. Caro's father in the centre was Frederick Ponsonby, the 3rd Earl of Bessborough, and he can be seen here rather charming and fetching in the centre. Caro's father, Harriet's husband, was by all accounts quite a tough person to live with. So Caro and her brothers had a bit of a tough start in life. Her father was described as a cruel husband, fluctuating between sweet or obsessive attentiveness, and either neglecting Harriet, her mother, entirely, or physically abusing her, both privately and in public. The Earl, like many others in his circle, was a big gambler, and he would erupt into rages when he lost, rages that would terrify Harriet and appear to have caused her family to fear somewhat for her safety. How protected from this fairly toxic environment the children were, we can only guess. In 1791, when Caro turned 6, her mother suffered a serious illness that gave rise to further rumours. Her physical state was clearly a cause for concern across the family. Adding to the complex and fluctuating family dynamic, Caro's aunt, the Duchess Georgiana, had only the year before given birth to the Duke's heir, affectionately known as Hart. But shortly after, she'd fallen pregnant to her lover, Lord Grey, and was forced into exile, banished from England and forbidden access to any of her children. This is really when Caro's story begins. Aged just 6 and, like her mother, consumed with an illness that nearly took her life. Excuse me. She left England for Italy, with her mother, Harriet, an abused wife, fleeing to safety. Her aunt, Georgiana, forced into exile with her unborn illegitimate child, and Bess Foster, an abandoned and destitute divorcee, intimate friend of Georgiana, as well as the Duke, with whom she produced 2 children. Caro accompanied these women first to France and then to Naples, where she recovered and Georgiana gave birth to a daughter, Eliza. Here they remained for nearly 2 years. It must have been a fraught and emotional time for all. In her letters, Harriet describes her daughter as a troubled, prone to fits of temper, and she questions whether Caro will ever calm down. It appears she was prescribed laudanum in an attempt to address these aspects of her behaviour, a decision with consequences resulting in an addiction that she would wrestle with for the rest of her life. When the Duke finally allowed Georgiana to return in 1793, on the basis she would have nothing to do with her daughter Eliza, Caro's mother, Harriet, was unable to travel due to yet another bout of illness, and it was agreed that Caro would return and stay with her aunt. She was now aged 9. By this time, the residential wings at Chiswick had been completed, and in a more measured response to Caro's behavioural issues, her grandmother, Lady Spencer, suggested she enjoy the therapeutic benefits of life in the countryside there, under the care of a specially selected governess, Selina Trimmer, who appears to have been at least partially responsible for Caro's growing love of writing. It was during this time at Chiswick, amidst a whirl of activity as the villa was renovated in the French style and surrounded by a complex family group, that Caro became very close to her cousin Hart, aged 5, who was profoundly deaf and already socially awkward. As a boy, Hart was temperamental and isolated. Georgiana deplored the fact that he seemed to prefer the company of servants. He continued to shy away from physical contact and was inclined to hysterics if his sisters teased him. Caro labelled herself a tomboy in her early teens and spent much of the time in the company of her beloved dogs, one of which you can see here. Those images she encapsulated in many of her sketches. Caro had nurtured her love of art and during her lengthy stay in Italy. The putti became her symbol. Childlike, delicate and ethereal, her drawings often represented the conflict between good and evil, in various different guises, a struggle that perhaps reflected her own internal battles. Here she draws a putti and a devilish ethereal figure, and calls it Despair Ends Its Days. One wonders what thoughts and memories were guiding her imagination. Aged 16, Caro was expected to abandon the tomboy and employ the garments and behaviour required of an eligible young debutante. On her return from her coming out ball in Paris, Caro met William Lamb, and there was an instant attraction for them both. So this is an image of Lamb on the right-hand side, and also a little sketch that Caro did on her return, showing her on the right with her dogs as the tomboy and on the left as the fashionable debutante. Caro writes, "Such is the breakfast at Chiswick when I walked around the garden holding William's arm, and when I wished to put a stop to time, being at that moment as happy as I ever wished to be." We can only guess as to how this relationship affected Hart, who was only 11 at the time, and who must have felt he was losing a close friend and confidant. On top of this, Caro was actively discouraged from pursuing this liaison by her mother from the very start. Though there could have been any number of reasons for her mother's misgivings, some have suggested that this was due to an unofficial understanding that Caro and Hart would marry. Some have also claimed that Hart suffered such a broken heart after her marriage that this was the reason he never took a wife. The 5-year age gap seems to make a union with Hart appear somewhat unlikely, though not impossible. Caro would have waited at least 5 years for her wedding to take place, and to a cousin who, though dear to her, she saw more as a brother than a lover. We should take note, however, that whatever did motivate the bachelor Duke not to marry nor to continue his lineage must have been extremely important to him, as producing heirs that would carry forth the family name and reputation was considered an essential duty of and by the British aristocracy. The fact that he appears to have remained childless, highly unusual for the time, and despite an alleged decade-long affair with a woman in Derby, suggests perhaps a fear of passing on his debilitating health issues to his children, or some other barrier that affected his intimacy with women. Hart suffered from what some would consider chronic social anxiety, made worse or maybe resulting from his well-documented hearing difficulties. Neither were conducive to building relationships outside of his trusted inner circle, As his mother had noted, he preferred to interact with his servants and employees. Not necessarily unusual for the time was his undeniable devotion to the men he employed and chose to spend quality time with, like the butler he employed in Brighton, who served him for over 25 years, and of course, Joseph Paxton, with whom he cemented a firm friendship based on common interests rather than status, and with whom he travelled abroad for 7 months to extend his plant connection and horticultural knowledge. Paxton was personally recognised by the Duke's family as the chief mourner at his funeral in 1858, an unusual role for a non-family member, both then and now. Though the reasons for these life choices remain elusive, the love he held for his cousin Caro and that she held for him is plain to see. She wrote him this poem. The wand was broke, her elves dismissed, the demons yelled, the serpents hissed, the skies were black, the thunder roared, when sad Titania left her lord. And on the right, she sketched herself as Titania, in the centre here, surrounded by angels with demons at the bottom. And what's interesting here is that this image of Caro is very, very similar actually to the portrait that Maria Cosway made of her aunt Georgiana as Cynthia, which is now at Chatsworth. Caro was leaving their shared childhood fantasy life behind and would soon sample the bittersweet taste of reality. Living with the Lambs appears to have added to Caro's significant anxiety issues, her new surroundings and family contrasting dramatically with the happy memories and calming influence, believe it or not, of the environment at Chiswick. William's family called her the little beast. The year that followed her marriage would prove more than a challenge for Caro. She gave birth to her first child, only to lose her soon after. And in March, her aunt Georgiana, who had played a significant and supportive role in her life, also passed away. So we actually have an image here on the left of Penistone Lamb, and on the right-hand side, Lady Melbourne. So she's actually the individual on the right-hand side, and it's Georgiana that you can see painted in the centre, and Andama on the left. Grief and a lack of adequate support, on top of pre-existing anxieties, affected Caro deeply, and her behaviour became what some have described as particularly erratic. Informing William before the event, just as he was due to make his maiden speech in Parliament, in a place where women were not welcome, she dressed as a man and sneaked into the gallery to listen. Caro often wrote to Georgiana's daughter, her cousin Little G, to reflect on growing up together at Chiswick, hinting at a life once full of passion and excitement. Sort of romantic and melancholy, she writes, the remembrances of those times, which I see is felt in still greater degree by William, to so great a degree that he acknowledges all after life seemed gloomy in comparison. On the left-hand side here, you can see the Duchess Georgiana with Little G when she's a baby, and on the right-hand side, a grown-up portrait of Little G, as she would have been as Caro was communicating with her, corresponding with her by letter. For Caro, these happy memories of a complex though carefree and loving past appear already sadly distant. An increasingly fragile state of mind and growing reliance on opiates caused her life to start to unfurl privately and publicly. The opiates that she consumed as a cure became a cause of her increasingly unpredictable behaviour. Caro's thoughts are intimately revealed in another of her communications with her cousin Little G. She writes, "Our extraordinary situation here, the uncertainty of our life, and those still dearer to us, the darkness in which our future existence is involved, the dreadful fear of judgment on every action of our life, and the still more dreadful one of not meeting those that we loved on earth hereafter. One thing alone in this world of gloom and disappointment can counterbalance every evil, a total rejection of all scepticism and reasoning. We know nothing, we can know nothing, and now I'm very melancholy. But indeed this month makes one melancholy, and long evenings by oneself and the wind whistling through the windows." Then something happened that threatened to impact dramatically on Caro's close friendship with Hart. One afternoon at Chiswick in 1809, Bess Foster, seen here on the right, tricked the Reverend Preedy into marrying her to the 5th Duke of Devonshire by telling him that he was just repeating what had already occurred. Caro wrote to Hart, "I detest such petty artifices as Bess employs. If she will be wicked, let her be so in the face of day. But when I think of the scene of deceit, plot, iniquity, and wiles this serpent has made use of, I shudder at the thought. I am also sure, my good cousin, that you told Bess you would not disapprove of it. Oh, she is a deep one. She has flummeried up a certain young marquis from his cradle. She knew well that influence would remain stronger than ever. This mistress of your papa's knows how to throw her chains about you. You once loved me as I always shall you. When I see you, I know you will take all steps to kiss me and appease me, but we shall see if I cannot, in my turn, be cold too." The same year, Caro's mother's lover for many years married Caro's cousin, Harrio, Georgiana's other daughter. To add to this confusion, Caro's brother-in-law, George Lamb, then married Lady Caroline St. Jules, which after the events just discussed must have irked Caro somewhat, as Lady Caroline St. Jules and her brother Augustus were the illegitimate children of the 5th Duke and Bess Foster. The two Lady Caroline Lambs, now sisters-in-law as well as cousins, had grown up together in what must have been a somewhat confused family environment at Chiswick, their relationship gradually deteriorating in adulthood as they were pitched against each other like pawns in a power play. William's family made it very clear which of the Carolines they preferred, and poor Caro found herself even more isolated, responding to loneliness by throwing herself into the social scene. In another of her poems, she writes, "There is Caroline Jules with her laces and thools, is good yet makes men sigh, while her sister runs wildish and seems rather childish, but oh, she's a roving eye." Caro's letters from 1811, the year of the 5th Duke's death, confirm that she was still spending time at Chiswick long after her marriage, often using it as a base from which to join the events of the season. She writes, "Chiswick, where I have been these last 10 days, was delightful. Never did anybody in the course of a few hours vary their abodes as I have. Dinner time yesterday at Roehampton, supper time at Devonshire House, and in the morning, between 1 and 2, here for sleeping." She also wrote to Hart about the people she encountered. "What world it is, dear sweet boy. What a flimsy patchwork face it has. All profession, little affection, and no truth." She wrote to one of her friends describing a masquerade party she had attended. "I put on my boy's shoe buckles and a red emery wig, a boarding school frock, so that I looked like a boy dressed up for a girl. And in that character, I told everyone that I impersonated Lady Caroline Lamb. I jumped like a harlequin, laughed heartily, and had no mercy on anyone." But life seemed determined to break her. Months later, she lost another daughter. The stress of this, combined with their son's mental health problems and William Lamb's consuming career ambitions, drove a wedge between the couple and affected Caro deeply. She became even more outspoken, flamboyant, and outgoing, behaviour considered unbefitting a woman of her reputation and social standing. Caro's preferred dance, the waltz, was considered risque. Conservative society, including Lord Byron, believed it would corrupt any young, honest woman who performed it, regardless of the fact that she spent many nights at exclusive waltz parties alongside the Prince Regent. Here you can see him on the right-hand side in a miniature painted by Richard Cosway. Spending more and more time away from the marital home, she inevitably embarked upon her first affair, with the son of, divorcee and exile from court, Lady Holland. He was a proper cad, the bad boy of his day. Caro, like several other women of the time whose lives are only recently being revealed, found that dressing as a man gave her the freedom to come and go wherever she pleased, whenever she pleased, without attracting any attention or requiring a companion. But dressing as a man successfully was seen as a serious threat to the social order. Not long after her affair with Lord Holland, at another high society gathering at Holland House, she was introduced to a young man called George Gordon, who would become Lord Byron. He would not dance, hindered as he was with a club foot. Gordon came from a long line of intemperate and notorious figures on both sides of his family. His father, Mad Jack, was known as a cruel and vicious husband who ran up staggering debts. His paternal grandfather, Foul Weather Jack, was the younger brother of the 5th Baron, Byron's great uncle, who in turn was commonly known as the Wicked Lord. His mother, Catherine, was an alcoholic and described as a woman without judgment or self-command, whose father had unfortunately also taken his own life. Caro was one of the many women who'd fallen for the character he'd written, Childe Harold, seen here in the front cover, published in 1859. She began courting his attention through letters and addressing him as Childe Harold. Caro's standing in society and fierce intellect sparked his interest instantly. She writes, "As this is the first letter I ever wrote without my name, and could not well put it, will you promise to burn it immediately, and never to mention it? If you take the trouble, you may very easily find out who it is, but I shall think less well of Childe Harold if he tries, though the greatest wish I have is one day to see him and be acquainted with him." By 1812, Caro's wishes were granted, and they had begun their affair. She dressed as her own page to disguise her movements, visiting Byron at his apartments in St. James, fooling her own family, as well as Byron's publisher, John Murray, who wrote, "A fair-faced, delicate boy of 13 or 14 years old, dressed in scarlet hussar jacket and pantaloons. He had light hair curling about his face and held a feathered fancy hat in his hand." It was a strong infatuation on both sides. They were both exceptionally intelligent and had an equally complex sense of humour. They were also well matched in creativity and liked to play with words. Both had experienced far from ideal childhoods and had suffered with bouts of depression and shared feelings of isolation. Perhaps recognising in each other a kindred spirit, both were quick to profess love for the other. So enraptured, so intoxicated, that Byron's time and thoughts were almost entirely devoted to reading her letters and answering them. Caro responded to one of his letters, "Never shall I forget you, or that moment when you first said you loved me, when my heart did not meet yours, but flew before it. Strong love I feel for one I shall not name. What I should feel could never be the same." It was Caro who now coined the world-famous description of Byron as mad, bad, and dangerous to know, as he too sought to control and contain her, banning her from dancing the waltz and continually chastising her for refusing to criticise her husband, William. And Caro was soon to discover she was not his only lover. As time passed, Byron's feelings for Caro began to wane. She grew more and more intense and determined to keep his attention, famously sending him a lock of her hair in a letter that said, "I asked you not to send blood, but yet do, because if it means love, I like to have it. I must one night be in your arms. I will kneel and be torn from your feet before I will give you up." But seeking to rise the ranks through a beneficial marriage and concerned his affairs would affect his opportunities, Byron's attention became firmly focused on Anna Isabella Milbank. You can see here on the right. Annabel reflected later, "I did not pause, there was my error, to inquire why he was friendless." Although actually well aware of Byron's shortcomings, telling her mother, "He is a very bad, very good man," she decided it was her religious duty to make him a better man. After a year communicating by letter, they were married in a private ceremony. Whilst Caro had dreamt of building a legitimate and happy life together, Byron brought the affair to an end, but admitted at least that he had never been so in love. Eventually, he persuaded Caro to return to William, who took her back. My dearest Caroline, if tears, which you saw and know, I am not apt to shed, if the agitation in which I parted from you, agitation which you must have perceived through the whole of this most nervous affair, did not commence till the moment of leaving you approached, my dearest and most beloved friend, I cannot express myself. This is no time for words. She clung to those words for the rest of her life, believing them and wishing them to be true, and trying to bring Byron back to that time. Her letters illustrate her desperation. Oh, may thy gentle bosom never know the storms and passions that have shaken mine, moments of rapturous bliss or frantic woe. Her feelings of devotion and sadness changed to anger and betrayal. And whilst by letter she tried to bring him back to her by reminding him of their intimate knowledge of each other in an almost threatening tone on occasion, in public she battled him with every means possible. She published mocking copies of his work, and once dressed as Childe Harold, accompanied by pages dressed as devils. When Byron had a portrait painted of himself by Thomas Phillips in robes, she had her own done by the same artist, dressed Biondetta style, as a page, holding out a platter of fruit, and then she arranged for it to be hung in the same portrait galleries as Byron's, beside his, so that her image was holding the platter out to him. I wish I'd got this the right way round. Sorry, I should have flipped these two paintings over and then she would have actually been doing that. Never mind, next time. These actions, though frequently embellished by rumour and gossip mongers, left her more and more isolated as London society closed its doors to her. By 1815, Byron was also in extreme financial distress and had begun to further unleash his frustrations on his wife, who was then pregnant with their first and only child. Depression set in and he began to drink very heavily. The following year, sometime after his last recorded meeting with Caro, and under considerable pressure, Byron finally agreed to separate from his wife and left for the continent, never to return. Caro wrote, I am sure in the end you will consent, even were everything now left to your own choice. You could never bring yourself to live with a person who felt desirous of being separate from you. You have accused me of having spread injurious reports against you. You have often been unkind to me, but never as unkind as this. Those who are dear to you cannot feel more anxious for your happiness than I do. The contents of this letter imply that information of a somewhat shocking nature had motivated Lady Byron to seek their separation. Public rumour had it that Byron had been intimate with his half-sister, Augusta. Lady Byron's memoirs later revealed a deep fear that this may have been true. But it may also have been an extreme means of protecting the family by covering up the real issue, his homosexual liaisons. Perhaps even a concerted effort to protect him from the legal consequences of this being proven true, which at the time was a death sentence. Further support for this supposition comes from the fact that after university, Byron had conducted his grand tour around the Mediterranean, ending in Greece, an area particularly noted at the time as a destination for men seeking the company of other men. Surviving correspondence between Byron and his friends imply that this was indeed part of his experience, and his affair with 14-year-old Nicolas Giraud is now very well documented. Once he had left the country, Caro's first instinct was to physically run. Once found, the family took her to Ireland, where she began her first novel, Glenarvon, which would prove at first cathartic, but its ill-disguised references to her peers they found unforgivable. Her marriage finally failed following the book's publication, which turned her private life into a salacious feast for the public that William's career could not withstand. Caro fell drastically short of the community standards that prescribed the comparative freedom of aristocratic women, who could have discreet affairs after having first fulfilled their duty in producing a legitimate heir. What was not tolerated was bringing the aristocracy into disrepute in the public arena by becoming an object of gossip and derision. Upon discovering Byron's death, she fell into a further downward spiral, refusing to eat or sleep and still firmly addicted to the laudanum. She and William were eventually separated by 1825, and a couple of months afterwards, she was officially declared insane. A type of insanity described at the time as a deviance from socially accepted behaviour that required management or supervision. In 1828, after a short life of tortuous loves and losses, Caro died aged 42, a year after the portrait that you can see here was finished. Having lived a very lonely existence for the last 3 years, one person, however, did not abandon her in her final hour of need, and though no longer married, William cared for her at Melbourne House until the very end. And there our journey ends into the life and tragic death of Lady Caroline Lamb. Again, I urge you all to explore her letters for yourselves, as I feel that this brief exploration only really scratched the surface.
Thank you so much, Nadege, for that extraordinary talk. I want to draw your attention to this beautiful invitation from Nadege and all the people at Chiswick House and Gardens to visit their lovely property. And if Rachel could perhaps show the next screen. So our next talk is on the 4th of October. Clive Francis will talk to us about the actor David Garrick's amazing life and loves. We have talks also from Ham House, Boston Manor House, Gunnersbury Park, Hogarth's House and Fulham Palace. I think one of the things that you'll notice there is what an extraordinary range of exciting stories about our amazing properties that we have to share with you, that there's so much for you all to learn if you do want to listen to these talks.